In this video, we're going to implement a grace period for our jumps, known to many as Coyote Time. Let's begin.
Shall we play a game?
Maybe your parents asked you the question growing up, if your friends jumped off a cliff, would you do it too? It's kind of a stupid question in my opinion, especially when it comes to platformer games. Of course we would. Jumping off cliffs, getting from one platform to the next is half the experience. And yet, in a platformer game, timing for our jumps is incredibly important. One of the things that we tend to forget as game designers is that as we're creating a game, we quickly master the controls, where if someone else picked up our game and played it for the first time, this isn't the case. Nothing feels crappier than when you're playing a game and you know you pressed the button, but your player doesn't jump and you fall to your death. Luckily, we have control over this and can easily fix this issue by giving players a little bit of grace, known as Coyote Time. Before we go into implementing this feature in your game, I want to ask you, do you find these videos helpful? When I first got started with Bolt visual scripting, I quickly became frustrated at the lack of tutorial content on how to actually use this program. And in a roundabout way, that's why I started making videos explaining the things that I've learned. So if you share my frustration and don't want to produce any tutorial content yourself, maybe you consider supporting me on Patreon. According to your level of support, you could gain access to my private Discord channel, gain early access to future content, take part in online polls, maybe get a shout out in one of my videos, or even download the project files for one of my builds. If you're the type of person who prefers a written tutorial as opposed to a video format, I've posted a link to my Patreon page where I've created a step-by-step tutorial on this build, which is free for everyone to use. Speaking of video shoutouts, I want to give a quick thank you to Sung-gi Yoon for supporting me on Patreon. And if you're impressed that I'm able to speak Korean, where I could thank him personally, it's really not that hard when all you have to do is plug the symbols into Google and have it translated and sounded out for you.
성기윤.
Before I did this, it looked to me like this guy's name was TP, police baton, standing on a rake, sickle stick, guy riding a surfboard. Anyway, Sung-gi Yoon, thanks for the support. Now, on to the cliff. Just to show you that this actually can work with whatever platformer game that you're working with, I actually built this on top of my 2D player controller that I built in a previous video series. And so if you're interested in checking that out and building this for yourself, I built this from scratch using Bolt visual scripting, and you can click the card in the top right. Anyway, let me show you real quick just how I have my player set up. On my player game object, I have a capsule collider here. I have everything else hidden. There are other features to that you will see in the video build, but I use a capsule collider, and I explain why on the 2D player controller tutorial. And on its feet right here, I have a little feet position collider that is actually a box collider that is set to trigger. And what that does is it essentially gives me an ability to say, after I put a flow machine with a grounded macro on it, that I have this little macro set up on it where it says anytime it comes in contact with the platform, anything that's tagged platform, which my entire grid right there is actually set up on a platform here, so everything on a platform layer, when it comes in contact with what's tagged as platforms, then it will return a inner variable. And so if you're interested in building this for yourself, let me show you this super unit on trigger enter and exit, and this is essentially what it is. It just basically comes in contact with the platform layer, and it says, is it the same? And if it is, well, then it returns an enter, and same thing for the exit. Now, a quick note on your input tag here, that it needs to have default value, because you need to be able to edit that on the outside of that graph, which it gives you that little platforms window right there. So that's basically how my player is set up, and now I'm going to show you how to set up the Coyote Time on it. To set up Coyote Time to work on our player controller, we're actually going to have to add some new variables to our player. So clicking on our player game object, I just added 3 new variables here. One is called last grounded, and it is a float, and we're going to set that to 0. We're going to set up one called Coyote Time, or this will be delay, or whatever you want to call it. And right here, we're just setting this to a 0.1. We can adjust this later on. This is basically the delay on how long you leave the platform that you're able to jump. And so I just have it set to 0.1. You can adjust this later on. And then, of course, I have a Boolean called Coyote Jump, and I'm setting that to true. On our feet position collider,
we are actually going to add a new unit here, and it's going to look just like this. So let me move this in, and I'll show you the overview here. We need what to happen is whenever we leave the platform, we need a variable set on our player saying this is the current game time of when it left the platform. So right here, you're seeing it exits the platform, and it's unchecking grounded, so the player is no longer grounded, and it's taking care of the animator on my player. And then I'm setting the last grounded object variable on my player game object, which I have that set as a singleton principal, which the player, whenever it starts the game, it sets itself, the game object player sets itself as the application variable of player. And so we're setting the last grounded variable on our player to the current game time. So going to our player and looking inside of his object variables, down here at the bottom, that's what I have. Last grounded, that is a float. Whenever I leave, that will set, whenever I leave the platform, it will set that as the current game time. So going into my player, I actually have a jump super unit here. And this is essentially my jump super unit. And it's not real complicated, but I actually wanted to show that this works with just about any jump feature that you have. I actually have a double jump set up, and this is kind of ugly code right here. I'm going to go back and change that later on. But here, what we're going to do is we're going to do a Coyote Time check. That's the Boolean that we set up, saying, is the Coyote Time true? And so we're going to run this little input right here. And if it's not true, then what we're going to do is there's another condition to be able to jump, and that is that the player has to be grounded. So if it's not true, we're just going to check the original jump there to see if it is, and if it is true, I'm just going to run that into the function. So what the Coyote jump is doing is it's basically bypassing the grounded parameter. That was the condition that we had it set, that it had to be that way or it wouldn't jump. So Coyote Time is being checked right there, and then we actually have one more unit that we're going to set up, and this doesn't need to be connected to the jump, but what this is doing essentially is it's saying what is the last grounded game time that we have. Remember, we had that set that whenever we leave the platform, it sets the last grounded time as the current game time. And so what we're doing here is we're taking, okay, now what is the game time minus the last grounded time, and is that less than or equal to the Coyote Time delay that we actually had? Remember, we had that set at 0.1 at the moment. And it's running a constant update saying, is Coyote Time active, by saying the current game time minus the game time that the player last left the ground. And if it is less than or equal to that delay, well, then it is going to set the Coyote jump to true, and if it's not, well, it's going to set the Coyote jump Boolean to false. So as we come down here, it will actually fire whenever it's supposed to. So on my player here, if you notice that as he leaves the platform, he still has just a little bit of time to jump. Now, I actually did make one little change here. I actually set that to 0.2 because I noticed that 0.1 was not high enough, so I set that to 0.2. Special note on this, that anytime you set something in play mode, you're going to have to go and change it again. So 0.2 seems to work better for me. Now that whenever I start the game up, you should notice that, that as he leaves the platform here, he has just a little bit of time of delay to still jump.
So now you should have a little bit of grace period for your jump, which, to be completely honest, your players won't even notice is there, but they will certainly notice if it's not. Hopefully this video was helpful for you. Thanks again for joining me. My name is Megahertz, and I'm out.